I'm going to get started. I want to be very conscious of everyone's time. We have a lot to cover, and we definitely want to get to Dr. Gilbert's entire presentation today and have time for questions. So I will start. Good evening. My name is Nicole Josie. I am the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for SEPAC. I'm joined tonight by my SEPAC board, Beth, Kelly, Ann, Will, and Malia are here. And we want to just welcome you all to our third annual Race and Special Education CPAC meeting. This is the third year we've been holding this very important meeting on the state of race and special education in the South Orange Maplewood School District. Over the years, this discussion has been so enlightening. It's been centered around the firsthand experiences of families of color in our district. A lot of times it's been primarily geared towards elementary education. This year, we wanted to focus the conversation on the middle schools and the high school because we feel like that is a part of the district that isn't always discussed in these meetings. And a little bit about my personal experience and why I've been very much a part of leading this discussion year after year. When my daughter first entered the school district and I took her to school in kindergarten, I noticed there was a self-contained classroom and it only had African-American males in the classroom. And that was my first time when I was just kind of like, there's something wrong with this picture and it needs to be discussed and addressed. And that started my journey in special education and trying to, be a part of this in this discussion. Tonight, we are very, very fortunate to have Dr. Gilbert, who is the Assistant Superintendent of Access and Equity for the district. And he has a presentation that will speak to the demographics and the state of race and special education in the middle schools and the high school. I'm just very glad that he was able to join us and give us this information that we want to hear. We ask that if you have any questions that you please drop them in the chat. And after his presentation, we will go through the questions. If he hasn't covered it in his presentation, then we will ask him and give him a chance to speak then. Please just make sure that your questions are not specific to anything. Sorry for my phone. Not specific to anything personal or any sensitive information. Please try to keep the questions general. And that's it. So Dr. Gilbert, I am giving you the floor. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Ms. Josie, for the invitation, and thank you, CPAC, for allowing me to have this opportunity. At the outset, I will say that I did try to isolate high school and middle school. However, because of the numbers, I was fearful that I might inadvertently identify one of our students. So, the smaller the numbers get. And so what I ended up doing, you're going to see total numbers, but we can have a focused conversation about if you have questions about what's happening inside of middle schools and high schools with the data pieces. And so the charts that I'm going to show you will not have like the rates numbers, there'll be numbers. And because I want to be very careful about inadvertently identifying some of our students, because we do have a couple of categories where we don't have a large number of students in that demographic. And if I would put that up there, that could be easily identified. And so I just wanted to put that caveat out there. So when you see the graphs, you'll be like, oh, I mean, these things don't really say anything. There's a reason why I did that. But we still should be able to have some great discussion around race and special education. And I tried to be very specific around pulling data that is relevant to South Orange and Maplewood School District. But the conversations, hopefully, some of the things I will show you will lend us to some very good constructive conversation. So just as a time check, Ms. Josie, how much time do I actually have for the totality? How much time are you giving me?
Oh, we have until 8:30. That's what we scheduled.
Gotcha. Perfect. Okay, that works. And so what I'll try to do is go through my slides, and then we can just have a conversation for whatever time is left there. So I am not technology savvy, so I'm going to attempt to share my screen. And when I share my screen and my slide deck, I will probably not be able to see you all. So I'll need someone to kind of open their mic and let me know they can see what I'm trying to do. So let me see here. Share. Okay. Boom, boom, boom. And can you all see the slide presentation? Okay. All
Yep.
right. So, okay, very good. So I'm Dr. Kevin F. Gilbert. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Access and Equity. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the connections between race and special education as it pertains to our district in particular. And I thought it would be good if I start off with this particular slide. And so what this particular slide shows you is like the framework for equity that I'm using as your Assistant Superintendent for Access and Equity. And it kind of talks about why analyzing our special education data in terms of race is important, but also to kind of know that there are other factors that we want to really kind of look at when we talk about building equity across our district. And so at the top of this, you know, I highlighted for you that we have several policies inside of our board policies that speak to equity, and they're 5755, which is equity in education for programs and services, 5751, 55.1, which is access and equity, affirmative action program policies, 1140, and then we have our affirmative action program for school and classroom practices, which is 2260. This is important for me to kind of set up the frame as in, especially as it pertains to how we want our special education students to actually feel their experiences within our education system. And they are included in this whole mantra of what we hope to bring along. And so this model that I'm using comes from ASCD, which is a professional organization that many of us belong to. And a couple of years ago, they put out a taxonomy or framework that talked about how we could go about building equity in our schools. And I modified it a bit and put it into these 4 categories, which are belonging, opportunity, access, instructional excellence, and engage and inspire learners. I think it's important for you to know that we want to make sure that our students in special education can be their best selves, like we want all of our students to be their best selves. And so when we are looking at equitable outcomes for our students with disabilities and the work, we are looking at them in the same frame that we're looking at all students, right? So we want to make sure that they all have experience belonging, and means that their physical, their social, and their emotional needs are met. You know, how are we meeting those important areas? And a couple of indicators that we kind of, a few indicators that we kind of look for are, you know, do we respect and seek to understand the diversity of their individual differences, or students' individual differences and experiences? How are individuals being part of their learning community with their building or like a restorative culture, or are the facilities that we use authentic and move towards cross-cultural relationships? The individual will see their unique identities reflected through all facets, including through staffing, curriculum, instruction, and activities. And I know that that is vitally important, because as we're building this equitable and access, we have to really pay attention to make sure that all of our students see themselves, particularly as we talk about the curriculum uses and what the curriculum looks like for our students with disabilities in particular in mind, you know, making sure they too can experience school holistically, like all of our students are supposed to experience it. And then that we're social and emotional and physical needs are being met, and that we're doing everything we can. If you take care of those kind of things, then other things become very vitally important. We see our academics raise, we see the success rates go. And then if you move across, we talk about the opportunity and access, making sure we're providing that necessary opportunity and access for all of our students and our staff within our district. Instructional excellence is key. How are we making sure that our students are meeting their academic needs? And again, if you build on these first pieces where we're building that belonging, and then we're having these opportunities and making sure that they have access to what they need, then that helps raise that level of instructional academic success that we're looking for, with the end result being that our students are engaged and inspired when they leave. They're engaged and inspired to be part of the citizenry. They're engaged and inspired to meet the demands of living in a diverse world. And they feel good about themselves and know that, hey, we are a part, we are in this work together, and we each work together to lean in on the things that we do best. As we look at this framework, we do want to keep an eye towards a racial equity lens in all of this work that we do. So when we collect our data, when we look at our pieces to the puzzle, some of the data pieces I'm going to show you, we do want to keep an eye out for a racial equity lens. And so what does that mean? That means we want to make sure that race is no longer a predictor of outcomes, right? So we want to make sure as we look at our numbers, we want to make sure that we look at things that you won't be able to make a guess around this situation is going to happen because of the racial demographics of particular students, right? And so since this is a race and special education discussion, I'm going to be heavy around that topic as we talk about what this racial equity lens means. So that means that not only are we scrutinizing our data points for those gaps, we're making sure that those gaps aren't particularly leaning towards one group based on their racial demographics. And if so, then we have to ask ourselves various questions around that. In particular, of interest for special education, the one that comes up a lot is the overrepresentation piece, right? In special education, are students in special education being overly represented by one particular group over the other? So I'll stop there because that's a lot, and it kind of frames how I'm going to go with the rest of my discussion to sit and stand for other questions. I didn't read the entire framework to you because I didn't want to insult your intelligence. The belonging piece is such a valuable piece that I really wanted to focus in on that, but all of these pieces work together for that. So if Ms. Josie, I'll stand if anyone wants to ask any questions around this particular piece that I've shown you. All right, speak now, forever hold our peace. I guess you can. I guess you're not for holding your peace because there will be time for us to have questions afterwards we get through. So, areas of analysis when it comes to special education. What are some of the things that, in my role, that are important to me when I work with Ms. Boudin, our Assistant Superintendent of Special Services, as well as Ann Bodner, our Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instructions. We've been bonding and building this relationship where we really work together. But in particular, since we're talking about special education, what are the areas of concern? What are the areas that I want to really look at? So I start at the basic level. We want to look at all of our students with disabilities. So who in our district, how many students that we have, and then we want to look at them individually based on their diagnoses or their disabilities as they have been identified to us, and just wanted to know what different areas we're working with students, and we have students here in our district. And then class placement, right? We want to know how many students we have in our pull-out replacement, how many we have in our self-contained, What about the general education? And we also want to look at our discipline data. Within each of these areas, there are specific data points, breakout points that I definitely want to look at. I want to look at our demographic breakdown. I want to see what are the demographics in each of these categories. And I want to see, what's the composition of, what's the number of students, and break that down demographically. Then I want to do an analysis around a risk index, right? I want to see what does it say in terms of how likely it is based on your demographics that you may be referred to or have been accepted into our special education program. And then what's the risk ratio, which is the most important piece that we have to look at, because we want to try to make sure that get people as close to the number one as we can, which basically means that no group has a greater risk of being diagnosed or being placed in the special education over another group. That's a bit of a challenge in terms of you also have to weigh in the overall enrollment of our schools, and so in our students, and what that makeup looks. And in our particular district, we do have there's the risk ratio for our white and our black students is pretty close in terms of, but it's still a high number. So what that basically means is I'm really paying attention to really paying attention to the placements, really paying attention to the individuals who are being placed, and then want to really home in on why they're being placed, what are their disabilities, and working with Ms. Boudin and Ms. Bodner to really make sure we're putting in proper interventions and things in place that can help support our students. So here's one of these generic graphs I'm giving you right now. And so this is a graph that really shows you currently what our school enrollment is. And I use numbers simply because, again, a couple of our groups are really tiny, but just to kind of tell you what that looks like. So the larger circle that you see there represents, which is number 7. If you can't tell the color coding that is there, that represents our white students. So our 3 main groups of students, our 3 largest populations of students, are our white students, our black students, and our students of 2 or more races, or our multiracial students. Those numbers and the amounts of students that we have in there are large enough to where I could say that comfortably and not worry about figuring out, outing any of our students. So with those 3 being our largest groups, the smaller numbers really represent a smaller number of population within our school district. But at that rate, though, our 3 largest groups of students who are in special education are our black students, make up as our black students, our white students, and our students 2 or more races or multiracial. The circle on the left represents the white student total enrollment. So our current white student enrollment is hovering around 54% of our population. So that's a larger piece of the circle. Our black student population is now around 24%, and our students 2 or more races is hovering around 13%. So the circle to your left, again, it represents our white students. The orange circle will represent our black students. And then if you look down to the right, that circle represents our students of 2 or more races. And so as I go through the next couple of slides, those are the groups that I'm gonna kind of make the comparison to kind of know. Now I worked really hard to try to get the data for our classes We had a system breakdown we've been having trouble with Power School, and I just couldn't get those numbers to look right the way I looked them. So I will not be able to have the actual course numbers. However, I have looked at the raw data, and if there's some questions that come up today, I hopefully I'll be able to answer what those look like. So if you remember this slide, which is the slide again that shows you what our enrollment numbers look like, this is the slide that tells you who is in special education. And so in this particular slide, again, the largest piece, the largest number is our white students. So 44% of our special education students identify as white. Around 36% of our special education students identify as Black, and about 11% of our special education students identify as two or more races or multiracial. Now, I say that to you, and remember when I talked about there's something that we have to keep our close eye on, is like overrepresentation. So if you go back to this slide where I talked about the total enrollment pieces, and now you look at this slide, we're definitely paying close attention to the number of students who identify as Black and multiracial that are in special education, because we want to try to make sure we do not have an overrepresentation of those two groups. These numbers were pulled a couple of weeks ago, so I can't say these would be our definitive numbers by the time we have to do our reporting, but it gives us a good snapshot and a good mid shot into looking at who is within our special education program. This is what we call, when we talked about our risk ratio. And I will tell you that when we talk about risk ratio, again, we're looking at, based on all the students in that particular group, what is the risk that you will be identified as a student in special education. I will tell you here that this peak right here at the top, right here, that does not represent our Black students. So that does, or our white students. We do have another demographic within our community that has a very small number, and a couple of students who identify that are within our special education program. And so therefore that number looks way higher than all of the other numbers. We do have to take into account, again, the total enrollment number. And so that number may skew the graph a little bit, but the thing of particular interest for me, though, is that when we look at our risk ratio, the number 7 and the number 2 represent 2 is representative of our Black students, and you probably can't even see me pointing to this. And number 7 on the end here represents our white students. And if you look at this graph, you can see that that point is a little bit higher than the other graph on the end. What that is saying to us right now is that in our early indication is that our Black students are slightly have a higher risk of being classified than our whites than other students that we have in our district. It's not the risk ratio is not a comparison kind of thing where you're comparing groups across. The risk ratio is basically saying, between all the groups, what is the likelihood or what is the risk of that group being classified. I will say that the number is close between our Black students and our white students, but both numbers are ones that I'm keeping my eye on because those risk ratios are extremely high. I show you these three graphs as examples of the work that goes into analyzing data, because all of the data points that I talked about here are scrutinized through that same level, right? So when we talk about students based on diagnoses, gonna go in there and do all three of those charts for that group. When we talk about, placement in classes and any type of gaps we see, any type of high risk we see, that's a clear indication that we are going to have to elevate our strategy. We're going to have to elevate our interventions to do what we can on the general education level, to do all that we can to make sure we meet the needs of our students. And so these were just some quick snapshots that I wanted to do, because I wanted to spend a lion's share of my time in open conversations with you all around the issues that you see and reactions to some of the data that I presented, but most importantly, to talk about, issues and things that we need to pay close attention to as we continue to move our district towards equity. And so I'll stop here. I'll stop sharing my screen and we can open the floor up for questions.
Okay, I actually have a couple in the chat. So I'll start with the first one. Given the overrepresentation of certain demographic backgrounds in special education, what sort of professional development have teachers had on culturally responsive teaching?
That's a very important question. So I've been here in the job for 9 months, and that is definitely something that I'm paying close attention to. And so I've already had initial conversations with Ms. Bodner around, we're actually going to be looking at doing some, so there's been a lot of culturally responsive training on the surface level done prior to my arrival here and currently happening in our district. It's time now to deepen those trainings. So we're going to be bringing in some deeper diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings that will now move us from surface level to actually having our teachers and our educators really take actionable steps towards meeting the needs of our students. And so some of those things that I'm looking at are, I'm doing racism trainings that are out there. Right now I'm participating in a book reading group on called Fugitive Pedagogy, which looks at the art of Black teaching. That may be something we may elevate towards a professional learning. There's been great work done by Zaretta Hammond on culturally responsive teaching, and that we may also really explore, that we're looking at too, as well as other courageous conversations by John Singleton. So we've had groups that came in that have done some of the understanding bias work, understanding who your students are, looking at the different types of relational pieces. Now we want to go deeper into challenging our educators to really get to know their students, but meet those needs based on who's in the classroom.
We had another question. In regards to race breakdown, how does South Orange Maplewood School District compare to state numbers, especially in the jump for Black students from total enrollment to special education?
So in anticipation of this question, I did talk over with our Assistant Superintendent of Special Services, and right now, I believe our numbers are below the state average. So we're looking good in terms of that compared to other districts across the state. And so we are monitoring that to make sure that we kind of keep in that level. But compared to the state, other schools, we are below that average right now.
There was another question thrown in the chat. I know you discussed about the different placements in special education, self-contained, pull out resource. And they were asking, are you going to be able to show a breakdown of that? Is that, I know that you didn't show that. Is that because of the smaller number, not wanting to identify somebody in there?
Yeah, so as I was looking through the numbers, as I was looking through the things and preparing the charts, I just couldn't figure out how to put those together without a fear of outing students, and I can't do that data. So I have all of the data, and my idea is to come back and crunch the numbers and actually figure out a way to get that kind of presentation and maybe come back when I can have a little more definite opportunity to put that together. And then the fact that our power school's been messing up lately really hurt me in what I was going to be able to present. And so I unfortunately, I wasn't able to bring that tonight. But we've begun the conversations of looking, especially on our high school area, to see, you know, who's in our classes, what students are in those particular classes, and making sure that there aren't any huge gaps in terms of, are there a majority of our white special education students going into our general education classes versus our students of color, right? And so those are some of the numbers I'm in the initial parts of analyzing, and I just didn't want to put that data out there without having definite numbers that we could have a constructive conversation with.
Okay. Have you noticed in all of your examination of the data that there's a higher percentage of Black children in restrictive settings over other races?
So I have, as of now, I have not seen that. But again, we'll have more definite numbers as we get closer toward the end of school, where I can actually analyze those. And so, but currently, the first initial numbers that I have not seen that kind of gap yet.
Okay, do you have data on the racial breakdown of special education kids in inclusion, self-contained classes, pull out resources, and especially out of district?
So that was part of the larger pool that I had, and I have that. I have that data. But I was unable to get it demographically broken down. So I have the breakdown versus male versus female, but I was unable to get the racial breakdown and the percentages of our students who are out of district placement. In the initial view of the data, though,
I might, Dr. Gilbert, I might have some of this from,
okay.
but not for current right now, for a couple months ago. Let me dig through some of my meeting minutes for one of my other committees and see if I have any of that. If you guys want to move on, and then if I find anything, we can come back to that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. All right.
What type of family engagement do you intend to do for this work?
Yeah, so family engagement is important and crucial. You plan to, you know, so one of the things is that I introduced is Inclusive Schools Week, is a project that we introduced to our schools. What I hope to do is engage our families in our special education community, as well as our students in our special education community, as we roll out for next year Inclusive School Week, their ideas, their thoughts on how we can best elevate both the understanding of our students with disabilities, as well as how to make sure they are part of our general school communities. I love doing focus groups. Ms. Josie and I meet bi-weekly, and then coming up with other kind of ideas based on those meetings on how we can come into these kind of meetings, working with Ms. Budine to figure out other engagement pieces that are important. But in order for us to meet our access and equity needs, coming up with strategic family engagements is crucial to this work. And so one of the things that I hope to do is keep plugged into this organization, keep my ear on the ground as I visit our schools as often as I can, having conversations with the school leaders, and then seeing what other events that I could roll into to hear what's happening in our world of special education, and wanting to make sure we do all we can to support our students.
Okay. Do you personally interact with child study teams in regards to cultural competency and anti-racism training, or do you know what training and guidance they are given?
So Ms. Budine and I have regular conversations around that. I know that that is huge on her agenda in working with our child study team. And so I am connected with her in that work, and the same type of elevated trainings that are coming for our teachers, we'll make sure our child study team is also involved in those heavy PDs as well.
Okay.
I can jump in. What I did find was for our out of district placements,
Okay.
I had racial breakdown, and what I did was I converted it to percentages just for confidentiality purposes. That would be a little easier to protect confidentiality. So the three areas that I looked at were the three that you brought up as our largest groups: white, Black, and multiracial. Of our out of district placements, 54% are white, 31% are Black, and 7% are multiracial. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Budine.
Does the district have any specific goals about outcomes for special education students around equitable outcomes?
So if you go back to that chart that I showed you at the beginning, those are the same type of outcomes that I want for all of our students. And so those same goals and those same outcomes will be expected for our special education students. And so when we look at all of our data in terms of our achievement data, in terms of our performance data, our discipline data, and all of that, I want to pay special attention to what's happening with our students in special education. And so them meeting the goals and the marks is crucial to building equity. And equity is for all of our students. And so we have to do everything we can to make sure that our special education students are being treated equitably in our program. So yeah, they have the same goals as all of our other students when it comes to equity.
To piggyback off of that question, they said also in regards to NJSLA or absolute achievement, the equitable outcomes.
Yep. So one of the things that after, and I think when Ms. Bodner presented to NJSLA numbers, she also included in there with the special education numbers as well, and paying attention to the gaps that are there, that are prevalent in there, and really working with our special education teachers and staffs to figure out what are the things that we need to do to narrow that gap is part of the agenda.
As you know, suspension rates are higher for children of color as well as for special education students. Many times these two demographics overlap. Can you talk about how you are handling suspension disciplinary rates with respect to equity?
Yep. So one of the areas I have to monitor is our suspension rates. And I can say right now that we are not seeing a disproportionate rate of suspensions. Well, first of all, we just came off of a moratorium last year. So this year, the moratorium was listed, but what was not taken away from it is that before students are suspended, they have to kind of notify me, and I have to talk them through restorative outcomes or things before we signing off on those suspensions. And I will have to say that we also have a matrix in place that our administrators have to follow, and especially when it comes to our students with disabilities, there's a more of a scrutiny put into that factor to make sure before we suspend those students that other things are taking place, like having meetings to make sure that it's not a manifestation of their disability and things like that. And I can say that currently, and I don't have the numbers right now, but but based on the number of suspensions that we've had and who's been approved for them, the number of special education students is not disproportionate in terms of who's being suspended. As a matter of fact, I asked immediately when I first get the letter, is this a student that's been classified? And if the answer is yes, then I say, have you done A? Have you done B? And then we talk about whether or not to approve the suspension or not. And I've only had, I think, maybe, and I can say this, 2 or 3 suspensions that have come up dealing with the student that's classified. And I think I may have only approved 1 suspension of those 2 or 3 students. And so that's a good low number. So one of the things, and to the point around, exclusionary discipline and why we really pay attention, because we know that, students with special needs, along with students of color, are 2 of the highest groups sometimes that we see this disproportionate rate of discipline happening. And so really putting things in place to scrutinize that is one of my top priorities. So I want to make sure that we have structures in place, that we're not as ambiguous in how we're approaching the discipline practices, and really paying attention to the classification of the students before making determinations if they should be sent home.
Okay, what about unofficial suspensions of special education students in regards to being sent home for behavior? And then they also brought it up at the elementary level, even though we're kind of focused on middle school and high school, but we could speak to that a little bit.
So that's a suspension, and I have not been made aware that we are sending children home to take timeouts or stuff. That is definitely something we are not supporting. So if that is happening, I need to know about that immediately, because regardless of if you're telling a student that, hey, you need to go home and take a breather and come back, that is still classified as a suspension. And that is part of that when I talk about ambiguous interactions and things like that, those are things that I need to know about. And so just to give you more insight into, so when an incident occurs and a principal wants to suspend, they have to fill out a suspension and restorative justice form, which comes to me, which talks about not only the incident, talks about everything they had to do, that they put in place to try to keep from suspending the student, and have to give justification for why that suspension is being had. And I bring that up to you and that's followed by a phone call to me and where we talk through it. And so even if a situation happens that they're even thinking about sending a student home to take a time out or something, I should be talking to the principal even before making that kind of determination. So Ms. Budine, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but I have not been made aware that is going on. And if so, I need to be made aware of that, because that is, there's no such thing to me as an unofficial suspension. If we're if we're sending students home for timeout, that is a suspension, and it needs to be lifted up to me.
Right. So I just want to clarify that there are two different situations where this might occur. One is exactly what you're talking about, that unofficial sending the child home, they're having a tough day, go home, take a time out, come back tomorrow kind of thing. You're absolutely right. That should be going through you. It is considered a suspension. We're removing a child from their program unofficially, and it should follow that practice. Then there are other students who may have, as a part of their IEP and their special education programming, a shortened day. That does not count as a suspension. That's a part of their special education program. So I just want to make sure that we have those two things separate. But you are right. If we are sending children home for any other reason and we're removing them from their program, officially or unofficially, it falls under the umbrella of suspension and should follow those same procedures. And that is something actually that we are looking into right now to make sure that, you know, we're following the practices and procedures that we should be, even in these kinds of situations.
Thank you, Ms. Budine. I'm so glad you showed up.
My pleasure.
So what should parents be doing if that happens? So if they're getting called to come and get their kid in the middle of the day, because they need a timeout or I guess unofficial suspension, what should parents be doing if that happens?
I will say this, if it's not in that category that Ms. Budine just talked about as part of that IEP, it needs to be elevated to me immediately. They need to give me a phone call or tell me what happened. And then Ms. Budine and I will meet and talk through it, and we will meet with that principal and see why that action has happened. K Gilbert at somsd.k12.nj.us.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions that you want to ask freely? Jocelyn, please do.
Thanks, Nicole. I had a couple of things I wanted to say. So first of all, thanks for doing this. I've been doing this kind of by myself with cobbling together stats that are publicly available for about 15 years. And this is not my forte. Numbers are not my thing. But it does seem to me anecdotally and through what I've seen is that as the placements become more restrictive from gen ed to, and I have 3 girls, I should just say, they are junior, senior, and freshman in college, and all 3 are classified or were classified. And as they went through the system from gen ed to inclusion to pull out replacement, definitely the classes became more, fewer white kids were in those classes. So by the time they got to pull out resource, pull out replacement, there was maybe, and my kids are Black, there was maybe 1 white kid in their class from like majority white kids in gen ed. So I would love to see those numbers. And if you could do it as Ms. Budine did, as percentages to avoid any, potential disclosure of sensitive information, that would be brilliant. I'd love to see that. And I'd love us to institutionalize this so that we get this every year so that we compare numbers year on year. And the only other thing I wanted to say was thanks to Miss Herbie and Miss Samuels. I see you came and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Please tell my girls I love them.
I will. Thank you.
We love you too, Jocelyn.
I can't say that. So Miss Budine and Miss Bodner and I meet on a bi-weekly basis. And the other day when our meeting, this actually came up. And so I sent a request to try to get, because I knew I had this meeting coming up, and I really worked hard to try to get that data for you, and Power School just wouldn't cooperate with us. So I do apologize. I wanted to have that for you, but I hear you.
Power School is not our friend right now. It's been a little frustrating.
It's been completely frustrating, and so yeah.
But if you could share whatever you can, whenever you get it, CPAC will make sure that we see it.
Yeah, because one of the things I want to do is I was going to share. I'm going to share this presentation with you, but I'm going to work on getting the other graphs, people that ask the questions, to get those put on here, and get the data people to work with me to create a graph that won't identify our students. And so that's a little bit above my pay grade. I can help crunch the numbers, but helping to design graphs and stuff, that's just that's just not me. I have to get someone to help me do that. So we can definitely do that. We'll definitely get that to you.
Okay, and I'll definitely follow up with you, Dr. Gilbert.
Yep.
I'm getting that. And as soon as he gets it and passes it on, you guys know, we'll make sure you guys see it firsthand. So
Actually, Miss Josie and I meet what, bi-weekly or weekly? I can't remember. Monthly. So, and so yeah, so but she also knows how to get to me if it's something that comes up before our monthly meeting. So yeah, just let her know.
we have about 4 minutes left in the meeting. I like to just leave the floor open in case anybody else has any questions that they want to ask, that they don't have to drop in the chat. If you want to just freely have a discussion with Dr. Gilbert.
I would love to jump in. So I just want to thank you, Dr. Gilbert, for taking the time and like answering all these questions. I'm someone who I have an elementary school student, but I'm very interested about how, things play out in middle school and high school. And I was asking a little bit more about academic data. And so just as like a parent and someone who I'm in education as well, just hearing a little bit more about how the district is setting goals, specifically like, I know in New Jersey, there are goals set around NGSALA, but also things, like overall progress monitoring. I'd love to hear just sort of more, how are you getting visibility into the student outcomes for like equitable instruction? Because at the end of the day, we want our special education students to have the same kind of outcomes that a general ed. So I'd love to hear more about how is the district progress monitoring and what kind of goals have you as a district set?
Right. So I don't know. Can you all see this
Yes.
slide? Okay. So a few months ago, I did a presentation to the board that was more geared towards general education, and one of the things that we advanced was, and this is just advanced math course risk ratio slide at one of our middle schools. And so when I talked about when we talk about goal setting, having this data, looking at this risk ratio, you can see a huge disparity in like the number of students who identify as Black moving into some of our advanced courses in our middle school, right? And so we take data like this and meet with the supervisors, gonna meet with the principals, and we're gonna try to get to the root cause of why that is happening and make a goal that can help shrink this number and shrink this gap so that we can make sure that we get this from where I think it's up here at a 3.8 right now to get it down closer to 1, where we want to make sure that there's no risk between groups on who is taking advanced classes or not. Now take this same graph. I almost included this in my slideshow, but it didn't pertain to special education, so I didn't do it. So take this same graph. I told you we're going to be collecting the numbers on what classes students in special education are in. We're going to do the same type of risk kind of assessment ratio look to see what that looks like for our special education students, and make another goal that makes sure that we reduce the ratio if it's as significant as this ratio is showing. So I don't know if that answers your question or if there's more that you want, but this is kind of an example of how our approach to looking at data, telling the story of what the data is showing us, and then making goals and plans to help to systematically reduce or eliminate gaps within our students.
I mean, that I think it is like the beginning of it. Could you talk more about some of the like, just like strategies, or like, do you have absolute goals? Like at the end of this school year, how will you know, like, do you have any goals about like what you want to reduce the risk ratio by? Like, are there any concrete goals that you or the district are developing to say like, we're making progress, like maybe we don't totally shrink it, but what would it mean to make adequate progress for you all?
Right, so we have our district goals that are outlined, that our superintendent has, that our board has asked us. And then within those are principles. So the way these goals work out, so we have our district goals, right? And then each of us as assistant superintendents have set goals based on the district goal. And then that goes down into our schools with our principles. And part of our principles have to have not only school culture and climate goal, but an academic goal. And it's inside those academic goals that we address. We're going to address that these specific goals to get into these numbers will exist. So I don't have it in front of me right now all the academic goals that our principals have, but you know, at a later time I could actually bring some of those to you so you can see that our principals are looking at this data and they're the ones looking at the specific academic pieces that go along with the goals. This data that I showed you a few minutes ago was what came out this year. And now based on that, I'm going to be working with the supervisors to actually come together where we have not finalized that yet, but there will be a specific goal coming out that actually speaks specifically to narrowing those risk ratio numbers and things like that. That data was presented in December. And so we're going to be working to actually get a goal that connects to that. I just revealed some of the, I just started really crunching some of the special education numbers in preparation for tonight. And I've already been, I know Ms. Boudin probably got tired of me. I've been texting her all day as I was looking at data. We're going to look at those numbers too and set some direct goals as a district too as well.
Kelly?
Regarding those numbers, is that the same numbers that's the October snapshot? And then is that what's been shared with you guys? Or, because I know that we usually can see those numbers publicly published in about May, but is that where that's being pulled from? Do you know, Ms. Bodine?
No, we pull ongoing data. So
Okay.
There's twice a year that the district pulls like state mandated like counts, right?
Right.
So they
It's
pull on October 15th, they pull again on June 30th.
Okay.
That is a whole nother set of data that's kind of used for a different purpose.
Okay.
Our data we pull regularly throughout the year so that we can see like how we're progressing and how we're growing and so on and so forth. So like, for example, the data that I shared for out of district, I pulled it a couple months ago because we were looking at that specifically for one of the committees that I'm on. So we had pulled that information. So we're going to pull that same information again in a couple months. So it's not necessarily related to that data that's pulled on October 15th.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sure.
Okay. Well, we have come up on time. If there are no further questions, if you guys have any questions that come up after we exit out of this meeting, please feel free to send an email to SEPAC, our website. Kelly just posted it into the chat. So if you send an email there, it'll get fielded to the proper place, me, and then I can ask Dr. Gilbert if you send something in relation to tonight's topic. I want to thank you all for joining again another year and having this very important ongoing conversation. It doesn't end in February. It's a conversation that needs to be had constantly and consistently. So please know that this conversation is ongoing. So again, thank you. And I want to thank you, Dr. Gilbert, for all your hard work on your presentation tonight. I appreciate you taking the time to even put this together for us. We've been asking for this kind of data for many years from many different people. So thank you for coming through. And thank you, Ms. Budine, for joining tonight. As always, it's always great to have you here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having
And everybody else who came into the meeting tonight. So I'd like to thank you on behalf of SEPAC. Thank you for joining the meeting. Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a good
all.
night, everyone.
Night,
Good
everybody.
night.